We're so glad you're here today. We're going through a series. I started last week. This series is specifically for men, okay? It's on Samson, but I'm sure that, women can get a lot out of it. And after I finish this series, I'm going to do a series specifically for women on Ruth. So this series is on Samson, and we're going to talk about the power of negative emotions. And I will start off by saying something that everybody knows. It's tough to be a guy. Isn't that true? It's tough. It's tough to be a guy. I was talking to a teacher here just recently, and she was telling me that she taught pre-K, and there was like 9 boys and 4 girls in her class. She said the boys are needy. They need help tying their shoe and learning how to hold the pencil and have a pencil, make sure they have a pencil, There's a lot of things, and guys like to think they're in charge and all that. I found a picture that shows there's proof that there's marriage in the animal kingdom. I like this picture because he looks like he's in charge, but you can tell that she is in charge. Okay, so it happens with young people. My son John and Alyssa, they live he works at a church in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and they got a house not too long ago, and so she starts telling everybody, we're getting a dog in August. Okay, we'll be go over visit them, eating breakfast, and she says, just out of the spur of the moment, we're getting a dog in August. Well, John was not really bought into this dog idea, but she kept saying, we're getting a dog in August. And so he said, we got so many things to do. We need to finish up. Anyway, I got this video last week. Oh, okay. It's called River, okay? Rivers. They named after, there was a softball team that we had, the James River Rivers. Anyway, it's tough being a guy. And a lot of times we're driven by, I don't know if you want to call it testosterone or whatever it is. We're driven by our emotions in many ways. And I know guys say, oh, I'm not emotional, but we're driven by something sometimes. It's not always logical. And this is what went on in Samson's life. Now, Samson was from an area, a city, I got a map, Zorah. He lived in this area with his parents, and he was raised as a Nazirite. In fact, when his mom became pregnant, there's an angel that told her, we want you to live as a Nazirite while you're, before he's born. And then when he is born, his whole life, usually being a Nazirite was a temporary kind of deal that people would do for a short period of time. But his whole life, and it included like 3 things particularly that he was supposed to not do. One of them is he's supposed to not drink alcohol at all his whole life. It was supposed to not touch dead things. And third, he wasn't supposed to cut his hair on his head, not his beard or his hair ever. And of course, he violates these things his life because he is driven by his emotions over and over again. Now, he lived in that area, but I got a picture of the cities in this general region. The region, by the way, in the dark is this where the Philistines lived. And you'll see that one of the major cities there was Gaza. I can't help but saying a word about this because Gaza is in the news a lot in the last year. I got a picture of where Gaza is today, this next map, the Gaza Strip. I do want to say that the Philistines are different than the Palestinians, okay? Philistines, we don't know exactly where they came from. Maybe the Canaanites, it was a sea people. But this area has been overrun by people many, many times. The Palestinians are different in lineage as far as ethnically. they're from Arab background, okay? They're linked to the Arabian Peninsula, okay? But the Philistines were, there was big conflict between the Philistines and the Israelites, and there's still conflict today in the area of like Gaza and what's going on. I mean, you know, remember in Hamas invaded southern Israel, killed over 800 Israel civilians, taking 251 hostages. Israel retaliated, and there's been this war going on in the same area where Samson was taken and he had his eyes put out. Okay, there's been conflict here for forever. And so I want to focus on the Bible story because a lot of times we only know the Vacation Bible School children's version of the story. The only part most people know is Samson and who? Delilah. But most of the book is not really about that. And it's epic. It's tremendous storyline. My wife and I got to go see a musical in Chrysler Hall this weekend, Les Miserables, and it was just absolutely fabulous. It was epic, you know, a tremendous story and tremendous music went on through many different things. And this is the story of Samson. It's an epic, okay? And so it's a time when he was driven by his emotions. Early in the story, he's a Nazirite. He lives in this town, and he visits this other town, and when he's there, he sees a woman. And he goes to his parents and he says, get her for me, because they have arranged marriages. And he basically says, I want her. And they said, oh, come on, can't you get a Philistine? You know, why do you have to have a Philistine woman? Can't you get someone from the Israelites? And he says, no, I want her. He is emotions driven. The question I want to ask, and I want you to take away as we leave today, are you emotions driven or spirit led? Especially you guys. Do you let your desires determine what you do, whether it's talking about the food you eat, the places you go, whatever you do? Are you emotions driven or are you spirit led? So Samson definitely was emotions driven. So he the next slide, he lives in Zorah, but he sees this woman in Timnah. Notice the dark area. This is the area of the Gaza area where the Palestinians live, and he sees her, okay, and he wants her, and he doesn't think about, well, is this right for me to do this? Should I do this? He just says, nope, I want her, even before he even talks to her. He just, I guess, likes the way she looks. I don't know. And then the story goes that we went through last week. He sees this honeycomb in a lion that he kills with his bare hands, and he likes it, and so it was miraculous that the bees made a honeycomb inside the carcass of a dead lion. And so that means a miracle would have had to happen because the lion, that's normally not where bees make honeycomb. But that's where it was, and he violates his Nazirite law and touching the dead thing, scoops out a handful of the honeycomb, just eats it as he walks along, and then he gives it to his parents without telling them where it came from, which is pretty gross. Be careful what people give you to eat. Samson was emotions driven. Okay, so today, the story we're going to talk about is the worst wedding period ever, period. Now, we don't think about weddings as being bad, but I have seen some. I was pastor years ago, 30 years ago, okay, and I was doing a wedding, and the day of the wedding, I got a call in the morning. It was like on a Friday. I had 3 kids that were at home, and I was taking care of them. My wife was at work, and this guy said, Pastor, I need you to meet me and my family over at the church in 30 minutes. Emergency. Okay, so, we couldn't find a babysitter. I had to call my wife. Sharon came from work, got off, and took care of the kids, and I went over there. So we had this meeting with the bride's father and his lawyer, because the bride's father didn't think she should marry this guy. Okay, even though this guy was a great guy. It was a mess, okay? And that kind of conflict was going on. But that wedding was nothing compared to this wedding. Judges 14-15. It begins this way, Judges 14:10. Now, Samson's father went down to see this woman because this is the Philistine woman that he says he wants. Anybody remember what this woman's name was? Trick question, we don't know. We don't know what her name was. It never says. And Samson holds a feast, as was customary, kind of for a wedding. They would have 7-day-long feast. I've got these pictures. These are actual photos of the feast. Not really. But I like the pictures. It helps me remember things. But you can use it in your imagination. It was a big wedding. Okay, and so lots of drinking every day. He was a Nazirite. He wasn't supposed to do it. He was into it. And when people saw him, they chose 30 men to be his companions. Now, evidently, so he came from a different area. If you go to a wedding today, you don't expect all the bride to have her bridesmaids and then the groom to have nobody. And so they picked some people for him, companions. Here's the thing, though. The word for companions actually means choice Philistine warriors. These were not his friend. They weren't his groomsmen. And by the way, why so many? I think, even though there's no definitive proof, I think Samson was a big guy. I think he was a little bit scary to them. So they call out these special forces guys to be like guards to Samson to make sure he behaves himself. Well, Samson is not a shy guy. He is a man's man, okay? He is a guy. And so he's not scared of him. In fact, at the wedding, he's probably had a little much to drink. And he says, let me tell you a riddle. They would play games at weddings. He said, here's a game. If you can give me the answer within 7 days of the feast, I'll give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Okay, so there's a picture. He's bragging to these guys. This is what I'm going to give you. And so it's a challenge for them. By the way, guys like to bet. I've played golf with lots of guys, and they just do. I mean, it might not be anything. We bet a Coke or something, but guys like that. They like to bet. What do you think? Well, I'll bet you. And so he says, if you could tell me the answers, you must give me those 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes, 30 real nice sets of clothes I'm going to get if I win. And they say, okay, tell us a riddle. We'll take you up. Let's hear it. And he replied, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. That's the riddle. For 3 days, they thought about it. They asked around. In Hebrew, it's like 6 words. It's written like this. From the eater, out came eats. From the strong, out came sweets. That's the riddle. Now, if I was one of them, I probably would have thought something like this. Well, it's a wedding. People are eating all the time. Maybe somebody's like, throwing up, and out of the eater comes something to eat. I don't know. Out came eats. Not something to eat. I eat. Maybe something like that. Maybe they guessed that, but they were not it. And so they don't know what it is. Out of the eater, out came eats. From the strong, out came sweets. They don't know what it is. They struggle with it 3 days. And so they use a different approach, these guys. They blackmail the bride. On the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, by the way, she's considered as a wife through this ceremony. It lasts for 7 days, but she's already considered his wife. And they say, coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, so we'll win. And so they gather around her. They intimidate her. They're heavy-handed. They downright scare her. In fact, these were not friends. They say to her, if you don't do this, we will burn you and your father's household to death. And then they say, did you invite us here to steal our property? This is the same word that stands for land. You know, in this area of the world, there's this land, and there's still a fight over who owns the land, and there's this conflict. And so she hears the threat, and she decides to use her greatest method of persuasion. You might guess what that is? She cries. She cries. Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, "You hate me. You don't really love me. You don't love me." If you want to persuade a guy, cry. I believe it works. It works. And she says, "You've given me my people a riddle, but you haven't even told me the answer, and I'm your wife. You haven't explained it to He says, "I haven't explained it to my mom or dad, so why should I explain it to you?" They don't know the answer. By the way, you remember the story? He was out, he killed the lion. That was a strong thing. And then he went back later and ate the honeycomb. Nobody saw him doing it. Nobody knows about it but him. Even his parents don't know it because they wouldn't have eaten out of a dead animal. So he says, "Why should I explain?" But she cried 7 days of the feast. I mean, a wedding is supposed to be a celebration. His dream of getting married was 7 days of partying. But his bride cries 7 days. Every time he sees her, she's crying. He couldn't take it. 7 days, he finally told her because she continued to press him. He breaks down, he tells her the secret, the riddle, and she betrays him. She, in turn, tells the riddle to her people. I mean, what do you expect? She doesn't want to be burned to death. Ironically, it's exactly what happens because she tells him. So, before sunset, on the 7th day, the men of the town come to him, and they answer with the same kind of questions that his question was. They say, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" They don't explain the whole story. This is very well written. It's like, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Okay, so he knows that his wife told him. He knows he was betrayed. And he said to them, what you should never say to a woman: "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." Guys, never call your wife a heifer. No, it's bad. It's the wrong thing. A heifer is like an overweight cow, okay? And in Hebrew, it actually means, "If you had not plowed with my heifer." That's all I'm going to tell you. It's not good. It was bad. That's what he's saying. You cheated. You cheated. So he becomes angry that they cheated him. And it says, now this guy, remember, this guy has a superpower. Samson has a superpower. You ever wish you had a superpower? Samson has one. The strength. And it says, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon. Ashkelon, he is down in the Philistine, deep in the Philistine area, a town on the water, and he goes down there, and instead of buying 30 sets of clothes, guess what he does? He strikes down 30 of their men and strips them of everything. Strikes them down, takes their clothes, and gives their clothes to those who explain the riddle. Samson burned with anger. He was an emotion-driven man. He let those emotions go whenever he felt it. It says in 14:19, he was burning with anger. He returned to his father's home. So 7 days of his wedding, he's getting married. He leaves his bride there. He's honorable. He fulfilled his bet. He got them the clothes, throws it at them, and then he returns back home to Zorah from Timnah. So he goes home. Now, what do the people there at the wedding think? Bad wedding. Bad wedding. Well, her dad, has spent a lot of money on the wedding. He's got everybody there. They've gone through all these celebrations. And so here's what he does in his thinking. It says, Samson's wife was given by him, her father, to one of the companions who had attended Samson at the feast. So he gives his daughter to the best man. Here, you can get married to him. Don't want to waste a wedding. Samson doesn't know anything about this, by the way. He's still so mad he can't see straight. So he goes back home, and as time goes by, don't know exactly how long, it says later on at the time of the wheat harvest. Now, when you think of this in the way we would think, okay, weddings often take time in the spring, and then in the fall you have the wheat harvest, but then you have to look it up because, things here aren't exactly what they were there because the wheat harvest is in May, okay, in their culture. It wasn't in the fall. Harvest time for them was in May. Maybe the wedding was early April, so it was a little while, maybe a month goes by, and Samson gets over being angry. It took him a while. He gets over it, and he decides to get a young goat, and for him, this was like a box of chocolates. It was like flowers. I mean, if you ever get a young goat from your husband, he did something bad. Here's a young goat. I don't think anybody's ever gotten that. Anyway, he took a young goat with him as a peace offering and went to visit, notice not his bride, his wife. As far as he's concerned, he already married to her. And he gets to their house and he knocks on the door. Daddy comes to the door and he says, I'm going to my wife's room. Her dad would not let him go in. Imagine how her dad feels when this guy shows up. He thought he'd never see me. He said, I'm so sure you hated her that I gave her to your best man. Can you imagine he dropped the goat. The chocolate spilled on the floor. Samson is a man of great anger and passion. Superhuman strength because of God had given it to him. But the man thinks quick. Her father, he says, isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead. Samson said to them, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them. In the Hebrew, it goes like this. It's really, this time I will be absolved of guilt. I unleash disaster. And so he did this. He went out and he caught 300 foxes. Now, I don't know how you catch 300 foxes. I've never seen more than one fox at a time in my life. He catches them, he ties them in pairs together with their tail, and then he fastens a torch to every tail. I don't know exactly why he did this. Maybe that made the foxes run away from each other in the fire, and they zigzag through all the fields. And so these foxes are running through the fields, and he lit the torches and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. Understand that this area of the Philistines was the primary crop, was grain. This was their livelihood. And he burns up the shocks, the ones that have been gathered together, as well as the ones that are the grain that's still in the field, together with the vineyards and the olive groves. Everything went up. Samson burned up all their crops and all their fields. He unleashed destruction, not just on one family, but on the whole community. And of course, the Philistines react. Okay? When the Philistines ask, who did this? Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, they said, because his wife was given to his companion. And so then, what did they do? They went up and they burned her and her father to death. Worst wedding ever. Just a a true, awful experience. And then Samson said to them, since you've acted like this, since you burned my wife and her father-in-law, I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. And he attacked them viciously, and he slaughtered many of them. So I guess he killed those 30 attendants. You know, he killed the people that had been in that area involved with the wedding. And then he went down and he kind of hid. He stayed in a cave at the rock of Edom. I got a little map that shows he went to Edom from Timnah. And now the conflict gets bigger. It's an escalation. This was a conflict between Samson. By the way, did y'all all know all this story? Okay, I don't know. So this conflict between this guy and his in-laws now has grown. Now that everything was burned up in the fire, now they killed somebody, now he killed a bunch of people, and these two nations, the Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi. Spreading out because it's a whole army comes after Samson. And the people of Judah, the Israelites, you'd think, they said, you come to fight us? And they said, we have come to take Samson prisoner, to do to him as he did to us. Now you would think that maybe the people of Judah knew that God had given them the land and they were supposed to take it and not live in harmony with the Philistines, but they were afraid of the Philistines. The Philistines ruled over them. And so you would think, well, this is an opportunity. You've got this new guy, judge, this superhuman guy. We're going to follow him. We're going to defeat the Philistines. That's not what they did. 3,000 men from Judah went to the cave in the rock of Edom and said to Samson. So they go back and talk to Samson and say, don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us? And, he answers, he says, I merely did it to them what they did to me, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. They did it to me, I did it to them, which is not the highest moral ethic you can have. But what Samson does, and they said to him, we've come to tie you up and we're going to hand you over to the Philistines. His own people say this to him. And Samson says, well, I'll tell you what, swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves. And they said, agreed. We'll only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you. And so they bound him with 2 brand new ropes and let him up from the rock. You see, when Samson destroyed all their fields, he stirred up a hornet's nest. This army now has come to get him. They tie him with new ropes. And Samson is being led. Maybe they had a white flag as they're going back in the Philistines. And as he approached Lehi, where this army is set up, the Philistines came toward him and they were shouting, that's him, he did it. And the Spirit of the Lord powerfully came upon Samson, and the ropes on his arm became charred. That means they melted, they burned off. He didn't break them, they burned off, and the bindings dropped from his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey. And he grabbed it. And he became like John Wick. He said, with a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. He kills 1,000 men. With a donkey's jawbone, I've killed 1,000 men. And when he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone. And the place was called Ramoth Lehi, which basically means Jawbone Hill. Samson's anger became so powerful. You know, emotions today take men down. People do things that if they were in their right mind would never have done. Samson was driven by lust. and anger and pride. Now, you can look this up and come up with some methods of not losing your temper. That's not what I'm about. You know, I'm a preacher trying to preach what the Bible says. And the thing that I want you to think about is, are you emotions driven or spirit led as a man? Are you emotions driven or spirit led? And none of us are perfect. We all have tempers. We all fall short. We all do things we shouldn't do. But I think it's important that we learn from stories like this that, you know, here Samson was angry at what happened, but a lot of it was his own choices. He should not have tried to marry a Philistine woman. He should not have drunk that stuff. He was not supposed to do that. You know, he did all these things. He could have bought clothes and given it to them. Instead, he escalated by taking clothes and killing those men. And then as time went on, it got worse and worse. He burned all of the crops. You know, he escalated. We all have these drives in us. But the way that I think God wants us to live is when you have a need, whatever that might be. Maybe it's for companionship, maybe it's for success, whatever it might be. Let your need drive you to God. When you feel that need, maybe you have anger and you're mad, let it drive you to God. Philippians 4:19, this is the verse. My God will meet all your needs according to his riches of his glory in Christ Jesus.